Hi, welcome to episode 7 of the Armchair League. I'm your host, Novasight.
I'm Aspari-One.
This week we will be talking about, in our mechanics section, map rotation and solo queue. For behavior, how to read your opponent like a book. For community, the rise of the podcast war, starring Summoning Insight, First Blood, and Riot's potential new project. For the game itself, a more educated take on the new jungle now that it the update has been out for a while. And the meta topic is playing to your strengths. So, our first topic in mechanics is map rotation and solo queue. So, map rotation and solo queue. How would you explain it?
Well, honestly, I think it's self-explanatory.
Is
You're
it?
on the map and you rotate.
Uh, I
But
don't.
literally speaking, it's map rotation. I suppose is kind of a fail-safe to in order to make up for picks or doing bad in specific lanes. Like say you're up top and you need to go mid and mid needs to switch to top. That would be a map rotation. Sometimes there's matchups that just are bad in your or against your favor, and sometimes the enemy team will do the same when they feel like it's bad. Usually they don't at lower yellow, I've noticed. They tend to just take it, which is kind of bad, but usually in higher yellow, sometimes when they start getting diminished or something, or they notice a champion is capable of getting the edge on them because they've got something that manages to deal with them a bit better, but say for example the mid laner would be able to actually do quite a lot better against the enemy top laner than the current top laner. And then the current top laner could probably just moderately do, I suppose, evenly against the mid laner, so then you'd have an advantage going on there. You got pretty much a surefire mid lane getting fed top, then you got your top laner contesting the mid laner, making sure it doesn't really get out of hand. So that aspect would be quite beneficial for your team.
Alright, now that you explained a lane swap, it's time to tell you what a map rotation is.
Or wait, oh, isn't that wait macros? I thought that was what it was.
um, you you kind of had it, but you mostly described a lane swap.
There's map rotation when the AD carry and support go top and then top goes bottom. Are you referring to that?
No, that's also a lane swap.
Huh. Okay.
Okay, a map rotation is basically your take on what needs to be done at a certain point in time in the game. So basically, everyone starts out in laning phase, and then certain things. Oh, okay. Certain things happen that dictate what you're going to do next. So let's say your top laner is doing okay, and your bottom lane is winning, and they end up taking the turret. Now they have a choice to make, and this is a choice of rotation, whether or not they, now that they've taken the turret, if they want to go and help the mid laner, or they want to get some vision around and continue pushing, or they want to secure an objective like Dragon.
Okay, that's what you meant.
Yeah, that more has to do with objective control. So, map rotations can be very useful, more so in team fives than solo queue, but there are certain rotations that work in solo queue. They're more simplistic, but they work. Basically, you want to either rotate opposed to the enemy and push on the opposite side of them, or you want to rotate in such a way that you're meeting the enemy if you know you can actually beat them in a fight. And between that, you always want to constantly doing objectives like Dragon or Baron or taking a turret. That's all really just personal decision making. Well, now that you understand what I mean.
Yeah, that makes better sense. As Corey would call it in streaming, you'd call it a rotato.
Yes, mashed potatoes.
It's definitely a team tactical thing, and it gives a fair advantage to anything that you manage to succeed. So it's basically like rolling a snowball. You end up taking bot lane, as you said before, then you can switch over and go to Dragon with your support and take Dragon. Or you could switch up to mid lane and then help mid lane take their turret. And then switch back down to bottom. Because usually the enemy team would want to contest bottom now that you're out of there. That's generally what I do. But that's a case as well. And it goes the same, for example, going to top when you're mid. And if your mid lane has been taken, or even, for example, rotating to a different lane if your lane is kind of going sideways too. That's one thing you could do.
Yeah, so it's basically a choice you have to make at some point in the game. If you're not doing well, you might be better off rotating to a different lane altogether and helping them so they can help you. Anyways, effective rotation in solo queue can be key to winning the game, but it's not like a be-all end-all thing. Sometimes people like to do, well, what I refer to as zombie pushing, which is just wording up really well and pushing the lane endlessly and pretty much being a complete and utter nuisance to the enemies. And sometimes that works really well because you can pull a bunch of people to you, like I did in the game I just played for the podcast. I was playing Teemo and I just kept zombie pushing and hiding when people came up, and it gave my team a chance to take off and win uneven fights. And it's a pretty effective tactic. I don't know, do you think there's a better alternative to rotating in solo queue?
Not that I can tell. So far, rotating seems to be pretty useful when it's team gamings.
Yeah, Ultimate League is a team game, so things like that help. Yeah, there's not too much to really say about it. You can pretty much see the effects of it in games you play. Alright, then move on to our behavior topic. How to read your opponent like a book. So, this is more about laning phase than anything. And it can help in team fights, kind of. So the idea is to, when you're playing against someone in lane, you want to be able to effectively read what moves they're going to make. It's kind of like playing a game of chess with them in lane, or like a card game. You have to basically factor in every tiny little thing that they're doing, like how they're moving, how their health and mana looks, and how much they're using their spells. And you gotta be considerate of that. And using those kind of methods, you can kind of tell what your opponent is up to or will be up to, and you can exploit them. So it's really helpful. What do you think of the idea of reading your opponent?
Reading your opponent is an art. In all honesty, not everybody is capable of doing it. They can do it to some sort of level, but not everybody is capable of reading them to a level that you can read them like a book. And there's certain aspects that you can watch for to read them on a sub kind of level. But when you start getting intricate, like what they're going to do in lane, how they're going to react to certain things, stuff like that, that's a lot of analyzing. That's a lot of taking into account what they were doing beforehand, their behaviors, how they were acting when you did something like harass them, or just little things like that that you take into account, then kind of gauge what you think they will do. That kind of stuff takes a decent understanding.
Yeah, so basically, like I said, it's kind of like a strategy all on its own. You got to be able to read your opponent on multiple aspects, and it's as simple as looking at their health, their mana, looking at their movements, looking at their spells, and their summoner spells. Even map awareness is important for it.
I think what I can do is probably give more an example. Because I do a lot of opponent reading when I'm in lane. So I might
Alright,
be able to insight on that a bit.
I'll go right ahead.
Okay. So when it comes to reading on somebody and understanding what they're doing and how they're working, there's a lot of stuff that personally goes through my mind when I'm thinking about what they're doing, such as whenever I harass them or something, I take note of what they're doing. Figuratively, I don't literally just take out a notepad and go, oh, Jinx does this, because that'd be retarded. But what I usually do is when I harass somebody, for example, I notice how they react to it, what the reaction speed is to it, which ways do they end up going? Do they move back? Do they go towards their support? Do they kind of stand in place as the reaction portion? Like they're slow to react, so they take a couple shots, then start trying to move to deal with it. Stuff like that, as well as just watching their positioning and how to use that against them. So as the first example, like say you're Caitlyn and you're attacking Vayne, for example. Vayne keeps getting too close. So you notice, oh, she always likes getting close to the minion wave because she tries to get real risky with trying to get CS. So you can auto attack her a couple times as just general harassment. That's like a very basic level of reading them. But then you can take that into account even further and go, okay, she goes this far away from her support. Usually her support doesn't pay attention too much of what she's doing, so the support just hangs back or is in the bush, and it seems to be too far away from her zone. So she's going, for example, she's on purple side, I suppose, or I'll just say it that I can't think of it at the moment, but I'll just say it as far as the side goes. Their alliance is on or allegiance is on the south side of the map, and you're basically on the north side. So say the support's in the bush, and Vayne keeps moving too close to River when she's trying to CS. So you can look at that and you can apply like the basic analysis of that, saying, oh, okay, she gets too close to the minions, whatever, I can harass her. Or I could use that to my advantage, take note that she keeps going too far away from her support, that she also takes the harass from you, she reacts too slowly, she tumbles excessively, which screws over her ability to deal with that, and at the same time the support doesn't really do anything. That would be basically the scenario of what's happening. So you analyze all that and you go, okay, so she's doing this, and she's about to do this again. You talk to your support and go, hey, I'm gonna try and do something, back me up. So she gets herself chunked into a position where you can start auto-attacking her and say or your support is Blitz or something, for example. So when she gets too close, there's a couple minions that's in front of her that's normal, so you auto-attack the minions a couple times, just so they're low enough, then you Q, and Blitz notices that the Q nails the two minions that are in front of her, so he grabs her. She tries to tumble out of the way, you just auto-attack a couple times, alt, whatever. She ends up either blowing flash or you kill her, and the support probably wasn't able to actually do anything. So that's, in general, the kind of scenario that you could pick up on when you start taking into account more advanced things when it comes to reading your opponent and seeing what you're doing. And it's pretty nice because coaches, for example, do this all the time. When it comes to reading what the opponent does on the other team, I'm not sure all of them do this, or maybe they might do this. I'm not sure exactly because I've never actually heard, for example, someone like Loco Doco talking about the enemy team. But when I think about it, you can apply certain behaviors and aspects when it comes to the enemy team, especially when it's a 5v5, for example. If you've been going against the same team a lot, the enemy AD carry will soon just start doing the same things, you'll notice, so you can take note of that and try and figure out how to exploit it. That's what reading your opponent is like a book is for on the aspect, because you can take the analysis into account and start applying it to win. That's generally exploiting your opponent and exploiting their weaknesses.
Yeah, that's a pretty good example. You can also go actually deeper than that once you get used to the general idea of it as well, where you actually intricately know each champion in the game, and you know the cooldowns of summoner spells, and you know the cooldowns of a specific champion, and you can start using stuff like that against them.
Yeah.
Like
it keeps getting deeper and deeper and deeper. The more awareness you have when it comes to the champions and how to work with them, the more you'll start to understand and apply that.
And that's the thing that separates decent players from exceptional players. How much you actually think about your opponent in lane, and it can be second nature as well, but you always got to consider what their champion is capable of at all times. And people who just play the game without thinking about it, they never consider cooldowns, they never consider map movements, they never consider anything like that. And people like that are also more predictable and easier to read because they're the ones that aren't thinking about it. And when you go and know something as deep as champion cooldowns, you can use it against champions like Blitzcrank or Leona, for example, where they'll throw their hook or Leona's Zenith blade, and you'll know the cooldown is long enough for you to start beating on the enemy AD carry, or even on Blitz or Leona.
Yeah. And a very basic form of reading your opponent is an example I actually gave. I think it was 2 episodes ago, or was it last episode? I don't remember. This applied to basically top lane. So, for example, you're against Gnosis or whatever, and all he does is farm. But then, for some reason, when you're kind of closer to your tower, then all of a sudden, for some reason, Gnosis goes from, oh, I'm going to farm, to, oh, I'm going to start attacking you. So you wonder why, then all of a sudden, Hakerim or somebody pops out of their bottom, or out of River Bush, and starts attacking you, and it's like, oh, okay. So he's going to be extremely passive until his jungler is around. Then he's going to start trying to attack. So you can start taking a look at his positioning and how he works that way. In general, that's a basic form of reading them that a lot of people actually use quite a lot, because you can see it in bot lane too, especially when the AD carry or support are just positioning in a certain way, or mid lane. Especially mid lane, because you can read them in that aspect. They'll kind of, silver players for some reason, they'll want to go towards and hang around the bush that the jungler is in to try and lure you over to them. So the jungler just pops out or whatever and makes it a nice bait. And stuff like that. Especially if you don't have wards in that jungle and you don't see it, and they seem to be lingering around that side of the jungle, and it's just like, oh, somebody might be in there. You go around the side of the bush or something and drop a ward into the bushes, and lo and behold, there's Warwick sitting in the bush waiting for you to get close or something like that. So just little things like that you can take into account to try and figure out what people are doing.
Yeah, and that can very well make up for other things you lack, like maybe you lack vision control. If you can at least read your opponent, you have some remote idea of what might happen to you. So, community topic is the rise of the podcast war, and has to do with Summoning Insight, Richard Lewis's First Blood, and a project that Riot's working on that I'm not sure about completely. But so since after Worlds, basically, there's been a big. Wow, that was fast.
I know, right?
Anyways, there's a big boom in community exposure, basically. So there's more people that have been seeking content, and so a lot of new podcasts have been popping up, mostly from already famous members of the community, or even infamous members of the community. So, First Blood being a podcast that came up pretty recently has been gaining a little bit of popularity here and there because it has Richard Lewis is kind of a controversial person in the community with some pretty steady guests, like different players and whatnot. And there's also Summoning Insight, and even though Thorn was let go from On Gamers, he continues Summoning Insight, which is fine, but he causes some community controversy as well. And there was also Riot wanted to do their own thing because they're not particularly fond of the people who are doing these podcasts because they're kind of exposing some of Riot's crap, and Riot doesn't like that. So yeah, they're kind of working on something, but I'm not entirely sure if it's gonna actually take fruition. There's really no name for the project. There's just mostly rumors. And because of all this community exposure lately, we've got a lot of people popping up in other aspects as well, wanting to basically get into the scene. I don't know. What do you think of all these recent podcasts and stuff popping up?
I'm not sure of it. Because I'm not really that far into the community scene as you are. So I don't really know that much. Ouch.
That's true. Well, we're better anyways. In fact, everybody ignore what we were just talked about. There's no other podcast in existence. Nobody else creates content. We're the only people who exist.
Okay.
What? It's true.
I believe you. Before this, though, I didn't even know Riot was doing a new thing for this.
Yeah, well, there was some controversy recently with Richard Lewis and Riot because he kept like revealing stuff that Riot wasn't ready to talk about yet. And he's always seems to be on top of things that other people don't typically know, like roster changes and new players moving to between regions and so on. But he's been a he's been a critic of Riot's as well, and Riot has been particularly happy with some of the stuff he said. One of his criticisms was that Riot has so many projects going on that everything they do is completely and utterly slow, like to a fault, because they have too many areas of focus.
I suppose that's a valid thing to say. I mean, the more things you expand on, the more things you have to deal with.
And there was another thread a while back saying Riot is trying to kill talk shows in hopes they can create one of their own. That's where I got this Riot creating some kind of podcast or talk show rumor.
Yeah.
But this was mostly just something that Richard Lewis himself posted, and it might be a case of, oh, Riot's just out to get me, because there's nothing to really confirm it. Basically, hold on, I'll just paste it to you,
Okay.
and we'll probably include the link on our episode on YouTube, so you guys can read and kind of think about this. So yeah, take a look at that link in Skype. That was basically Richard Lewis's take on what Riot's trying to do.
Huh. Okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure what to make of that.
At XJoshi. I know Riot have a problem with me. They're currently working on a chat show of their own to shut Summoner's Insight and FB.
First Blood.
Ah, okay. To shut Summoner's Insight and First Blood down, and they are even instructing their editors and writers at LOL Esports on ways to move into leaking roster changes.
So he says. I'm not sure if that sounds, coming from only a single person, it seems more like a conspiracy theory than anything.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know what to take that as. I like to think with every little bit of crazy there tends to be some truth in there, but I'm having troubles deciphering what truth there is. As far as this segment goes, I think this is about it.
Alright, our next topic is game itself, and it's a more educated take on the new jungle. Now that we've played around the jungle a little, we have more of an idea of what's going on and the way the jungle should be taken at this point.
So far it feels like more passive and utility type junglers tend to have a bit of a harder time in jungle, especially with last season's runes and mastery is kind of set up. Because when you look at the minions and such that are in the jungle creeps, they tend to hit harder, I find now, than they did before. So often when I'm playing Sejuani, just with my old runes and masteries that I was testing with, it almost feels like she often needs to go back to heal on the first run through, because once you make it to golems, it's like, oh god, you don't even want to take on golems because you'll get slapped. Now this is just my feel of it, but now more offensive and pro attack kind of champions for jungle seem to work better, like Vi or Yi or Kha'Zix or champions like that seem to be more damage rather than locking people down like what Sejuani does. Because the passive damage just doesn't feel like it does enough to me. So that's probably what I'm going to be pivoting to, as more attack-based junglers myself.
Yeah, so it's pretty agreeable to most people that the jungler feels more challenging to clear the first time around. And it's pretty much just the way it's set up. The monsters in the jungle are quite a bit stronger than they were. But after first clear, once you get your like primary jungle item, it's not that bad. And also now there's different ways to start in the jungle, although it seems to be Gromp to blue and Krugs to red for most people.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, I don't really see a problem with blue and red start being the first thing still, depending on the champion. Especially if you can get away with it.
I don't mind it. For the most part, though, to me it feels like it's, especially with a more passive champion like playing Sejuani, as I was talking about before, I almost feel like I need to go, I'm just going to call him Fat Toad. I almost feel like I need to go to Fat Toad to start with, just so I can get that passive that you get from it, the buff, to do more damage within the jungle because it's ugh.
Yeah, Gromp.
Yeah, that passive poisoning is just it's great, especially when working with Sejuani's AoE.
Yeah, most people like doing Gromp. And when patch 4.20 first came out, this is another issue people were seeing with jungle, and that was they were letting the lane opposite to where the jungler's starting kill the Gromp or um, Krugs, depending on which side you started. So letting the AD carry and support do Krugs, or letting the top laner do Gromp if you're on red side. And then they were getting level 2 really fast. Like, they were getting level 2 basically before lane even started. And that was giving them a huge advantage over the enemies. And the gold the jungle has been giving people was also pretty good, but they decided in patch 4.21 to reduce the amount of gold you get from jungle camps unless you have the jungle item itself in an effort to, I guess, alleviate that problem a bit. But a lot of junglers also think they don't make enough gold anyways. And I kind of understand that too when I'm playing jungle. It seems a lot tougher to get gold from anything. So I've decided that what I would do is get defense and utility and worry about getting damage later on. So I'd go like 21 or 0.21.9 basically,
Yeah.
or 0.921 even, depending on what I'm jungling. But that's just my take on playing the jungle. Another aspect is dealing with enemy junglers in general. I think it's a lot harder to counter jungle people now because they can just, if they kill you and if you try and kill them in their jungle and they end up killing you, you're pretty much set back for a good huge portion of the game.
Yeah, there's definitely an advantage to counter jungling somebody. Because, oh my god.
Successfully counter jungle them, then it's good, but I mean, if you can't pull it off, then it's actually worse for you.
I guess they tried to make it a roll of the dice, but it's like, oh my god, it's pretty ridiculous if you can pull it off, because before it was like, oh, okay, you just kind of make them lag behind a little. Now it's like, oh god, you just slapped them in the face and took a crap on everything.
Yeah, it's more high risk, high reward.
Which is rough, especially if you're not good against counter jungling or not really expecting it or stuff like that. Like, I don't really do counter jungling or stuff to do with counter jungling. So that was a bit of a slap in my face.
I liked counter jungling, so it was pretty decent for me. And then final issue with jungle was basically people being able to do dragon at level 2 and level 3, like Pantheon players and such. That one's pretty tough to deal with.
Oh yeah.
Because dragon means so much more this season, I'm pretty sure, with the buffs it gives you.
What
So
did they fix with Pantheon anyway?
they reduced his attack speed in the recent patch,
Okay.
and they made the dragon a bit tougher to deal with early on. I'm pretty sure you can still kill it at level 3 with Pantheon, but I think it's a lot harder to, and most people can't. But I think it's still possible. There's probably just a different way of building to be able to do so.
Probably.
But I'm pretty sure it's still possible.
When I play Pantheon, I just screw around with them anyway, so I do full attack speed runs. I'm probably not accounting for that.
Maybe. Well, that might be the case because most people, when they did the Pantheon thing, they just actually stack AD and armor and Emra as like standard, and it would be fine because Pantheon could just have pretty decent natural speed.
Yeah.
Yeah, they fixed it up pretty decently, I guess, but I think it's still possible to do dragon early, and that's like a huge snowball now. Because he who controls dragon fucking controls the game.
Essentially, yeah.
Yeah, it's
Pretty
pretty.
sure I could still do like a 3-minute dragon. Oh, I think I might give it a try.
Yeah, you have to test it out with your setup,
Yeah.
and I'll have to test it out with my setup and see what happens. I'm sure we'll find a way. Yeah, I don't know. What do you think of the new jungle so far?
Um, I don't really know what to make of it, to be honest. Like, I like the special camps and all that, but just the fact that they made everything just so much harder is like, ugh, really? I was
Yeah,
trying to learn it at one point, and it's just like, great, I have to relearn everything all over again.
I don't know. It's just the first clear that's harder in my opinion. It's pretty much the same, like clear wise.
Yeah.
At least they have lots of extra buffs and stuff you can use. I think that helps quite a bit. I don't know. I think that's enough about the new jungle.
Yeah.
Last topic has to do with the meta, and it's playing to your strengths. So, what do you think I mean by playing to your strengths?
Well, it's essentially the first stage to that, I would say, is just like a reading your enemy like a book, except it's the opposite of that. You're reading yourself. You're understanding what your own strengths are, then applying them.
Yeah, that seems like a reasonable way of thinking about it. So, this is something that's actually pretty huge to lots of players, playing to your strengths. Um, the big thing is lots of people love playing those flashy champions that look crazy when they're getting kills and you seem like you're just pulling off like the best moves ever. But in reality, most of the time, and especially in lower MMR play, you look terrible when you play those flashy champions, and you could be doing so much more with a better champion pool. And this is something that I learned from watching LS a lot, and he suggests that it's better to play champions that have more solid foundation, where you can focus on legitimate, like, game knowledge, rather than to pick a champion that's flashy and you have to focus on mechanics. Because if you're bad at mechanics and you're playing a mechanical champion, you're too busy focusing on that to apply game knowledge to win. Whereas if you're playing a champion that takes a lot less brain power, you can think about what's going on in the game more, and that goes back to being able to read your opponent, because then you'll be able to think about what they're doing, you'll be able to think about map control and wording, and you'll be able to think about what needs to be done, rotations, just general trading, and objectives. Whereas most people who play mechanical champions in lower MR are too busy thinking about how they're going to go about killing their enemy with their skills and whether or not it's going to work. And then you're not thinking about doing a big picture.
Because in the long run, essentially, unless you're just playing to just dick around, what your goal is to do is essentially just win the game, right? So if you're focusing so much on something that you shouldn't be focusing on, then you end up being a detriment to your team. And more so food to the enemy team. So if you're not a very mechanically inclined person, I wouldn't suggest playing champions like Yasuo, I guess, or Vayne, or someone who's just got stupid reaction times that's capable of pulling off all these crazy stuff, because of course it looks cool, but the question is, will you be able to play to that degree? And sure, you can practice and practice and practice and practice, and you might get good at that champion. Hell, you might even get retardedly good. Or you might just hit a skill cap, and that'll be it. You won't be able to achieve better than, like, say, a platinum or a gold level Vayne, for example. And if that's the case, then it's like, well, that's about as far as your mechanics go. So you got to take into account your mechanical skill, then apply maybe that to a champion that's not really mechanically requiring. So like Caitlyn doesn't really require that much as far as mechanics go, but you can certainly apply a lot of finesse to her style if you're mechanically capable.
Yeah, so you can actually think more about the important stuff like positioning and how to deal with your opponent in general, and skill usage and map awareness and other factors, whereas if you're playing Vayne, you're focusing on being able to get off the right sequence of skills and auto attacks on the enemy, and that does require a lot more brain power. And some people are exceptions too, like just people even in silver and gold who have crazy good mechanics, and they can play the mechanical champions and they can even carry with them, even though their like game knowledge and map awareness is shitty. That's actually how Doublelift was back in like the earlier seasons. He pretty much made it on mechanics alone. He had to be forced to learn game knowledge by playing on CLG for so long with various different supports. Honestly, I think it's better to know. I think it's better to see the big picture.
Because in all fairness, if you're playing to just play, that's fine. You can just play to play, whatever. If you're playing ranked and your intent is to climb, the only way you're going to climb is improve yourself. And how do you improve yourself? Well, you got to think about multiple different things that we've been talking about within these episodes. They will help you, obviously, especially if you are more aware of what they're saying rather than just simply listening to them. Got to think back to times that you were doing stuff in certain matches and going, oh yeah, I could have done this, or that's a good idea. I could have dealt with something dealing with this. And if you apply the knowledge that you have gained over the past couple matches, for example, in comparison to what you've done a couple matches ago, you'll notice even an improvement in there. Because the more you play, the more you'll understand your own strengths. And the more you understand your own strengths, the better you'll have judgment on what to play, who to play, and how to work with that.
Yeah. Honestly, like, even when I'm teaching my friends stuff about the game, I suggested to one of my friends that he'd be better off playing Champion X instead of Champion Y, because Champion Y takes too much brain power to play. And I helped him adjust his champion pool a bit, and he's been doing a lot better in games. He does better win ratio overall. He doesn't make as flashy plays, but he still does decently. And he still has some mechanical champions he does play, but not to the degree that it was before. I don't know. Anything to add to that?
Not really. In all honesty, you have to understand what you do and how you do it. That sounds pretty vague, but in general, that's how it is. You got to understand how you are first before you can understand how to apply how you act and how you move to better dealing with the enemy.
Yep. Alright, well, that's pretty much it then. To topics again were for mechanics, map rotation, and solo queue. And that's basically how you move into other lanes or objectives after completing your particular goals and moving on to next goals and goals after that and so on in order to win the game. And our behavior section was how to read your opponent like a book. It was basically you gotta see your opponent and look at. Oh, here's actually a good one from LS. He basically said it's better to be looking at your opponent than to look at yourself, because it's a lot easier to tell what's going on just by looking at them and pay less attention to your own champion. And our community topic was the rise of the podcast war, starring Seven Insight, First Blood, and Riot's potential new project. I'm not entirely sure what that project is or if it even exists, or it's just big words coming from Richard Lewis, but there's a possibility that there's going to be more things coming up. For the game itself, it is a more educated take on the new jungle. Now that the jungle's been played, there's been certain things that we've picked up on it, like how first clears are harder. It's easier to do dragons, although they have somewhat fixed it, but there's probably still a way. And our meta topic was playing to your strengths, and that's basically thinking about what champions work best for you in order to see the big picture rather than focus on mechanical play. And as I said before, I am your host, Novasight.
I'm Aspari-One.
Thanks for listening.
See you later.